Anyway, the kind of when I was told I'd have to talk, I said to myself, what else? What can I say? I've spoken in years before. Anyway, the topic of my talk happens to be silence and quiet. So, what can I say about that, right? Actually, there are two times in life that we experience and understand what silence is, and we also understand what sound is. Quiet, we understand best after a child is born and you have taken care of this little infant. Everything is comfortable and perfect, and the little infant goes to sleep. And then just as you hit your the heaviness of your own sleep, comes the cry in the night. And with this piercing sound, we begin to understand what quiet is. So, and then there is something called silence. Quiet and silence to me is a little bit different. I have a feeling that when somebody, God forbid, leaves us, or they even get very sick, and we're standing bedside, we're standing by tefillah, we back off. We back off with a lot of noise and everything, and we keep quiet. So, you know, the silence of a person leaving us and they don't answer us is broken up again by loud sounds of crying. And also, whenever a loud sound interrupts a certain kind of quiet, our quiet, it's that time that we really begin to understand a little bit about what quiet is and how special and even how holy it is. You know, in our community, if I could only go through my own experiences and my own acquaintances in the community of Bonyhad. I mean, the important people in the past, here in America even, was Shmuley Feldman, you could say Harabeni, Shmuley Feldman, and then there was Shmuley Herman. And they were very different kind of people. In my assessment, if Shmuel Feldman was an ish kol demomodako. He spoke softly. If there was a problem, he attended it softly. He reasoned softly, and his Torah learning was soft. And we know, and we accept on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you know, Eliyahu Novi, perhaps he was, I don't know if he could say this, but he was a little bit too fast and too brash maybe in complaining about the Yidden, how they didn't follow the dictum of the Rebbeinu Shalom and of his warnings. The Rebbeinu Shalom told him, hey, listen, he took him to a cave finally, and he didn't have this Ruach HaKodesh, he didn't have any of this Nevuah with him, and he was, of course, that was his whole life. And suddenly, in a soft, murmuring tone, he heard the voice of the Rebbeinu Shalom. It is this Kol Demomodaka that we remember on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur when we are singing Kivakoras. Right before that, the Kol Demomodaka. Shmuel Herman, Olav Shalom, in my opinion, was a kol teruas amo. He spoke loudly. He spoke with the confidence that he really had. I'm not even sure how he maintained that confidence after all the troubles that he and his family and us endured. But he was an Eish Lahova. He learned something, he said something, and he was right on the mark and loud. So that's another way of approaching another message we have from the Ribono Shel Olam, we say every Friday night. Kol Hashem Yechol Yolos, all the kolos that are in Mizmor LeDavid, there are 18 of them, and these are all loud kolos. They have to do with Mayim Rabbi Madidim, Shperei Yom, and they're talking about really powerful kolos, and these are the kolos that are going to, of course, take us into the future world in Mashiach. So I learned from both of them. You know, Shmuley Feldman, I spent time with. I had the zechus to ride with him on trains and to go. Even in the early days when we made this Suda, I went shopping with him to pick up the chickens, to pick up the things that we had. When somehow not everybody was part of this yet. It was a very sweet and beautiful thing to go with him. He saw to it to get the best, and also to make sure that there's a budget that covers it all. Very sensible. And then I remember Shmuel Herman. You know, he would teach the Gemara in the shul, in the Pa'alei Aguda, and even as a young man, I used to listen to him. He was clear, his Havana was good, and his knowledge was really tremendous, and people enjoyed listening to him. He was a really good Talmud teacher. So I want to tell you something else now, going back all the way to Bonyhad. I was 9 years old when we left. I was in the 3rd grade over there. Over here in America, I would have been in the 4th grade, and they actually put us in the 4th grade. And we had to go over there, we had to go to this public school. The public school, the room for the school itself, there wasn't enough room to house all the children at one time. So they had to split up the day into morning and night. But they didn't want, this is in retrospect, they didn't tell me as an 8-year-old, 7-year-old what they were doing and why. But I understand that they didn't want, in the winter especially, the days were short. It got dark at 4 o'clock, even earlier. And I know because I had to run to say Kaddish for my father, and it was already dark. Anyway, so they didn't want everybody to go always in the afternoon in the dark. And so they switched it. 1 week we went in the morning, and 1 week we went in the afternoon. And this way, we didn't have to share the whole season in the dark. We didn't have to be in the dark the whole season. And then, of course, there were all kinds of problems. We had to do homework for Shabbos, on Shabbos. They didn't, I believe, they didn't have a day off until Monday, was it? Monday was our day off, right? Not Sunday. Because they didn't want either the Jews or the Yotzrim and Noitzrim to have a religious day free. I'm not sure about this, but I remember reading it even, that the Soviets wanted one day off, it being nobody's holiday. So anyway, we had this homework to do, and we had to write in class. And I remember that there was a Kehillah, Reb Amram Goldring, all of us, I don't know if you remember him, he was chief in this thing. They went and they gave a matona, what we call a bribe, to the teacher. The town had an Erev. So he says, so the boys will carry their books. The boys and the girls, everybody had to go. He says, but don't make them write on the Shabbos. So we got away with it. But for the next day, we had to have our homework finished. And I still remember this little notebook that we had in the class. And my teacher was a man named Varda. And he would write out a homework and expect a note back from the parents. And then he would sign it Latam Varda. I saw it. I saw this note. There was a lot of anti-Semitism that went with his purpose and the way he did things, even though we were little boys. I mean, the punishments we got were unbelievable. He used to make me. He made me one time roll up my pants past my knees, and then kneel down on the floor, which was kind of an oily type, not slippery, but it was a black floor, parquet kind of thing. And be on your knees on there, and then to go out in recess with your pants up so everybody could see that you were on your knees. And meantime, to hold your hand out like this for I don't know how many minutes, it seemed like forever. And if your hand went like, you got a smack with a ruler. So it wasn't very nice to little children. Certainly, I didn't get to love him for it. So, but this was Bonyhad. But I tell you, there were some very comical moments that some of my friends over here who were in class with me, especially Leslie Barani, Baran Lutzi, we called him then. Some of us called him Birko, but he doesn't remember that. One time the teacher said, I'm going to write, everybody turn around, face the back of the room, stand up and turn around. I'm going to write something on the board. And he says, and then when I tell you, turn around, the first one who could read out what it says will get prize one, I don't know what. But this wise guy over here, this is Baran Lutzi, he didn't wait for the teacher to finish writing the thing. He stood up, and he stood outside. He stood right outside the line, as if he already read it, and he knows it. So when he turned around, he was like, okay. So then he read it. It wasn't so hard. But he was, this was him. We had sometimes a good sense of humor. I like always to remember about the times that we went to school, and my mother would make me, in the wintertime especially, she would make me something we don't even bother looking at or thinking about, but a schmaltzbread sandwich. She would make her own, we would make our own bread. Actually, we made a dough, and we took it to the bakery, and we got our name on it, and we brought it back. And she would slice this bread. It was a delicious, most delicious bread that I remember. And one of the things she gave along with it, besides the vegetables I went into the thing, she gave me a pickle, a homemade pickle. And it was all wrapped up in a newspaper. Paper was an expensive commodity under the communists. So I used to go to class, and it was winter, and I'd look outside, and I would wait for all the non-Jewish kids to go out of the class, and I would put my hand on my head and make a bracha, and washing for the bread was out of the question. I mean, I didn't even know where to do that. So, and I would eat it quietly to myself. And then there was always one little goyala. His name was actually Pishta. There was a lully and a Pishta. And I'm sitting there eating my delicious sandwich, Mama's having hano out of it, Gan Eden. I always saved my pickle to the end of the sandwich because I wanted to eat it by itself. You have no idea what this meant to a little boy. And all of a sudden I look at the door and there's this hair hanging down because he's looking in sideways like this to see where am I up to with the sandwich. And slowly but surely the head became more and more visible. And then he'd come tiptoeing in, and I'm looking at him and I'm trying to eat faster, and all of a sudden he comes and he grabs the sandwich out of my hand and runs out. So those were stories too. But for the moments that I had that sandwich and I would take a bite and I'd look out the window and I'd see all my classmates playing in the snow, it was like they were ballet dancers in slow motion. It was so extremely beautiful. The yelling and the screaming and the boisterousness went away from me, and I had a few moments of being Jewish alone and enjoying Hametz Lechem in Ha'oretz. These were things also in Hungary, also in Bonyhad. We had a Rebbe named Rebbe Kaf. Rebbe Kaf was, even as a child, I remembered how wonderfully, how much like tzaddik he was. You know, I don't know if everybody remembers, we used to go out, he used to take us out to play soccer. And the soccer ball was actually a basketball that Shmuley Herman sent to the Feldmans. He was already in America. He sent it through the Hayes, and Yitzchak Feldman would bring this basketball, and we would we'd kick it around like anything. You know, we had teams. Some of the kids were good, some of them weren't. You know, I remember a boy named Isaac Ullman. He was full of freckles, and he always walked around like he woke up and he needed another 7 hours of sleep. He was always like balmy as could be, you know? But somebody had to pick him for his team, so I picked him. I knew I'd get stuck, so I picked him first. And then there was Yermi Kreisman, who was a nice kid, but he was a little bit clumsy because he was heavier. I tell them, you stand here, and listen to me. And when the ball comes near you, I say, Rugyal Mag, kick it. And one time, he kicked it into the cheder window, and it broke. Lipabachi said, that's enough, Saka. Anyway, that was, for me, it's still funny to think of it, and I remember these things. Then I want to tell you, because this is a time to remember everything, we have to remember, I remember Barain Lotzi's father, Elner. His father was a very, very talented artist and even a set decorator. He did, I remember, lots of sets. You can't hear? No? He did a lot of sets for the Hungarian Sinhas. This is one of the things that he did. He didn't do it because he wanted to help them, but he wanted to give rest and some kind of COVID for the Yidden, which they always bothered us. One of the things he did was he made these pen and ink drawings, you know, on paper, and he had them framed. And he brought it into the classroom, and they were topics of the year. You know, they were like winter, summer, fall, and everything else. And believe me, I, as a person who didn't have his father, when I used to see him come in, and he came in usually right before like recess time, and he would start knocking it up on the wall, it made me feel very proud. But he was a kindly person, and even I, as an 8-year-old, recognized it. And perhaps because he wasn't part of the Kahila that used to sit and learn Talmud and used to teach Talmud, people overlook it. But he was such a genuine, good Yiddish mensch. And I remember him with special affection. So I want to mention him also amongst our people. Then, of course, there's Blo Lutzi. Leslie Blau, who is the author of this marvelous, this beautiful little book about the history of Hungary, and it certainly doesn't include everything. You need a lifetime to go through the whole research about the little things, but he did a great job in analyzing the content of the people and how many people were living there and so on. And he's not here now because it's difficult for him, and I don't know even if he understands when we talk to him. I visited him last year, and it was difficult. I should go again just to be and just to see him. I still have a wonderful picture someplace in here of him sitting in Poale Aguda when we had our things, and he used to talk so beautifully. He was a special, elegant person, and he always had good things to say about other people, especially when Shmuley Feldman, all of a sudden, when he walked into the Poale, he used to turn to me and say, "Itfaled Edyan Hashem, Ish Yashar." This is what this means. He was a lovely person with a lot of gemütlichkeit for other people. Huh? He's still here, but it's difficult for him to be here. So, huh? I mean, no, he was then when he was talking to us. That's what I mean. I don't mean in the past tense of his life. Then, I don't know if you remember a person named Machi Cohn in Bonyhad. He was the Iceman. You remember? He used to bring around with the Azlach. He used to come around with the Seltzer Man and also the Iceman. I, I remember at one time Shavuos came out pretty late in the season, and it was hot, and his ice machine broke. So we used to have like a fridge. I don't know if you know what it looks like. The center is where you put your food, and the sides they would put down these two big ice tablets into the thing, and he didn't have. So everything had to be done fresh for Shavuos. And I remember my mother said she wants to serve chirka, but where can you put the chirka in it? Huh? Chicken. He wanted to. Am I going on too long or what? I just have a few more things. So he, my mother said, you have to go because of Shavuos. We have no refrigerator. You have to take the chicken erev Shavuos to the Cheder courtyard. Don't forget, the whole town had a very good erev, and give it to Shochet Bachi Berkovich. The children are still in Williamsburg.
Berkovich family.
Huh?
This is the Berkovich family.
I know. So I remember Shochet Bachi was a special person. He also
Yaakov Duvet Breyer.
David Breyer, right. I'm sorry. And he used to also teach in the Cheder sometimes. I used to prefer that he didn't, because when we did something wrong, he had a little stick and he would whack us on the backside. He was much harder than Libet Kafka used to be. So, but he was a very, very good melamed. And anyway, we bought it Erev Yom Tov, and he put it in a place where the chicken could be held. And after davening on the first day of Shavuos, I went over to the yard, and he shechted the chicken. And, you know, it's much different halachas about kisadam and everything else. I was only a little boy. I don't remember the particulars, but he was very careful. And then I would take this chicken home in a bag to my house. My mother would prepare it. And that's the only way we had fresh meat of any kind on those hot days. And I not too long before the Muzhai Ruv, all of a sudden, before he passed away, I always talked to him because he was very close to my cousin Yitzchak Feldman. And he sometimes even walked over to come to his house. And I remember I talked to him one time, and I mentioned to him, I said, Rebbe, what's this Heiligkeit mit glatt kosher? Yeah, everybody's running glatt kosher. Ich bin gewesen in an ehrliche Stutt in Bonyhad. I was in Bonyhad. I never heard of the word. It was kosher a treif. And we used to go, I remember going to him, and to sometimes the kaf would enjoy, come together with him to see if this animal was kosher after shechting. And then you went home. Glatt kosher means if there's a question to be asked, you don't ask, because you could always give it to the goyim. The goyim was smart. They knew that if they had a treif chicken, a treif animal by the Yidden, they would never do it, and we don't have to buy it back. They'll give it back to us. And I really remember very clearly, one Pesach, we only had a tiny shtickle piece of busa. Why? Because the Kehillah worked the whole winter to put together money to buy gases. One of them became treif. After questions, after all the shilas, it couldn't go. They had to give it back to the goyim because they wouldn't buy it back, even though they could perfectly use it. There was a very, very perfectly usable animal. But, and that time the Kehillah divided this thing. Anyway, the Muzhai Ruf said, he wouldn't even want to see that old way of shilas and questions about kashrus come back, because we almost lost the Messiah for it. He says, we're not practiced. We're not used to doing this. We're not used to blowing up vases, except here and there. But this was a regular, commonplace thing. And if you want to know something, there is a letter, a beautiful letter, from the letters of Rashi HaKodesh. And you have to understand that most of those letters were written by his daughter. And then he looked them over, and if everything was right and he made his corrections, he would sign his name. There's a letter that he sent to the community in Germany. And they were asking him about kashrus, chickens and ducks and geese. And in the end, he gave the answer, but he said to them, don't look to make everything not kosher, because they won't come to you to ask the question. If there's too much chesed and kiss, they will not come to ask you the questions. He understood his people. Not everybody was, so I won't eat chicken on Shabbos, so I won't eat chicken. You have to be makel. And he warned them on this thing. And Muzai Ruf said, we have lost this whole thing about, I remember my uncle Mendel telling me a story in Makov, as you call it. They were poor parents, and they raised a goose for Pesach, not for Pesach, for Zikkis, and they fattened it up. And when they shechted it, because if you fatten a goose, you have to stuff its neck. So you have to be very careful, because then you could rip the whole thing over here, the whole right insides, and then it's not kosher. So they went, they shechted, and they were very poor. And now this is the Makkah Ruf himself was looking over the last moments of this animal, and he says he didn't want to make it not kosher for him, because he knows how little money he had. So he says, Mot Shmiel, dan ganzes Milchix. In other words, you can't eat it, dan ganzes Milchix. He didn't want to use the word not kosher. But anyway, this is related to the way we are, and I don't know if anybody ever spoke to the Muzayirov. He was such a wonderful, what was his name? Yitzchak Yeshirin Ben?
Menachem Mendel.
Ben Menachem. Huh?
Menachem Mendel and Yaakov Yisrael.
Yaakov Yisrael Yeshirin, yeah, he had a nice name. There were a lot of other stories I want to tell you. One more short one, and we'll see if we can end it. Used to be a man who used to come to us, Pinchas Brown, right? He passed away, Pinchas Brown.
Yeah.
And he was a Talmud of my, Yeah. He was a very sweet man. He worked here in Manhattan. I knew him then too. And he always pulled me aside to tell me a story about my grandfather, Yosef Yehida Marcus, Levi Bachi Marcus. He was a Rosh HaKol in Bonyhad. He was a wealthy businessman, and he also had a kollel, and it was, the Vayagid Yaakov writes about him. He says, "B'mokam echad, Gedila, Gedila b'mokam echad," and a lot of nice little letters like that I found about him. Pinchas Brown used to say, he told me this story, he says, one time there was a shaila about Yehadus. I don't know if it was Kenoas or Yehadus, but Yehadus. There was a philosophical question that was really bothering him, and he didn't know how to answer all the time to the community. So he took the yeshiva, and he rented a truck or a bus of some kind, which was unheard of in those days. I'm talking about the 30s. And he went to Munkach to see the Minchas Alusin. And my grandfather was so much not a chussid that, he had a spitzbedel, but when somebody said, if guy fragen the Rebbe, he says, who's the Rebbe can stein van dir, somebody was stuck in it's true. He said, Pinchas Brown said, he says, on the way they found some chussid stuck in a river with his carriage or something. Huh? With his carriage, with his horses and everything. So he says to his son, he says, "Gay some Rebben, ever helfen." He says, "Who's the wilde Rebbe soll kommen ausschleppen?" He got the boys in the kollel. Go help this man to get him out. He didn't like he didn't like this kind of open kollel hasidus. And the Munkacheru also didn't like it. He said it out loud many times. Anyway, Pinchas Brown went on this trip, and he always used to tell me, "Ich bin een Eid, ich bin gewein dabei." I want to give you a little picture. The Munkacheru was a tall man, was not thin, and his mind was riesige cup. I mean, he had a scientific mind, he had a Gemara mind. He was one of the big Gedolei Olam. His dar and dar before, every dar. And My grandfather was a heavyish guy, and he was maybe an inch taller than I was. I understand from people who knew him. 5'7", 5'8", at most. And so, and he's with a Spitzbadel, very neat, very clean, but an overland to eat. And he says they went into a room for hours and hours, and we were sitting outside learning. He told us, you keep on the Hazkarah, keep on the learning. I'll see you when I'm done. Spiegels Brown says, he says, when they came outside, the Munkat Cheruf stood next to my grandfather and berab him, because other people was already standing a long time. Why you have to wait so long? He put his hand on this hat that my grandfather had. He says, Dich darf men riefen moire moreino harav. Such a thing to say. And his Talmidim were like, what's going on here? See, this is over. He's talking to an overlander. He says, but I wrote down here this story of my grandfather going to the Minchas Loser, and it was a knackelige thing. I just wrote an email to Ronnie Lowinger. I don't know if you people know the family Lowinger. They are now, Ronnie, I don't know who else is with them, but they're in Bonyhad today.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He wrote me an email and he asked me where the old Marcus House address was, which of course I knew. And you're making me forget what I want to say about that. But to me, that he wrote it today on the yard side from the Bonyhad yard side. And my father, unfortunately, is laying on the side of the cemetery. There's a little, very beautiful matzeva that Shmuley Feldman arranged at his behest. Edith had given us a gift, and she had them print a very beautiful, make a very beautiful matzeva. But the Rabbi side, the truth is that matzevas are really, they're only short-time reminders. Short-time reminders. Our matzevas are our children. When you see your children are walking in the ways of their parents, when they're putting on tzitzis, when they want to know what chelis is, they want to know what Yiddishkeit is about. These are our matzevas. This is our nekoma for the Rishonim that did away with us for no reason at all, nothing else. And the children send our matzevas, and you should take care of this nevuah. Shlomo Karlbach used to say so many wise things. One of the things he said, we don't have Nevi'im today, but Nevuah goes out from the headquarters every day, every morning. Rabbi Shalom sends out Nevuahs. And one Nevuah is with us all the time. Which is this Nevuah? This Nevuah is about our children. Our children are the statement to the future. That's what Nevuah is, statement to the future. But he used to say, there are very strict rules about Nevuah. He says, if you are Novi Sheker, you chayiv misa. If you say, so this is the same thing, you have to take care of this Nevuah, your children. You have to make sure that they're presenting themselves as Nevuah emes. Otherwise, you kill them. Yitaka, there is no life. You are killing your children if you don't give them the Torah. So I want you to all take these ideas, or remember even what we said, the names that we mentioned. Take them with you. Techu imochem devorim, v'shuvu el Hashem, in Mashiach tzidkenu, now, tomorrow, now, this moment.
Amen.
Go ahead, Lena.
Right.